Okay, so what I'm going to cover is today is the databases. Can you turn those lights off, except for the one all the way to the left? Leave that one on. No, no, the one all the way to the left, leave that one on. And all the other ones, turn all those off. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Okay. So Postgres, I'm going to demonstrate Postgres. And I've got a link to that right there. And it's similar to MySQL, so if that's what you'd rather use MySQL, you could do that. I know on the lab machines, Postgres is installed. I don't know about MySQL. So I've got some instructions here on how to configure the lab machine to use Postgres, and some notes in here. Here we go. So I made some notes on that. So we're going to add this to the application that we have been building. And let me increase the font here. Bigger, smaller. Let me try that. Right, that's good. So I'll be adding to this, to this code base here that we got started, mmap. And we generated this using the Express builder, whatever it was. And let's take a look at this thing running first. So it's npm start. And there's a problem. You can't find this. Oh, got to get into that folder. There we go. And localhost port 3000. There's a users page, right? Only users are allowed to go there. So if we try to go there, we're not logged in, so we get booted out to the login screen. All right, so then the username and password, is just, it's hard coded in there. And we want to take that username and password out of the database now, right, instead of hard coding it. So if you look here, where would that be? That's in, what was that username and password? The login, right? So I put that in here. This is when we submit the login. It's a post, see, right there. Look at this, the login. Look at you see the form here? Wait a minute. Here's the form tag. Right there, see it? So that's this is a form, this whole thing. These two text boxes and that submit button are part of the form. And this starts the form, this ends the form here. And in this form, we specify the submission method as post. HTTP post method as part of the protocol. And the action is to, where to where to send the data. You know, where to send the form data. Send it there, which is the same place that we get the login form from. Right? It's the same route that we use. And then here's the input box. Right? Input type equals text. The name here. This is how we pull the data out on the server side. We look for user ID. Look for that name. We take the value for that name. Same with password. The name here is, I just call it password. We get the value that the user puts into that text field using that name. Then there's just a submit button here. And these are all input tags, right? They have different types. This input tag is type password. This input tag has type text. And this input tag has type submit. It's the submit button for the form. I want you to see that method here. This is the method post and the action as well. Those are important. And let's see, what are we doing here? Yeah, so this is where we register. See, there's the action. There's the method. Look up here. This is different. The get. This is the get method. This is where we simply return the form. This is the login form. So we're rendering. That means use a template. Use a template. Use the login template. So it's going to look for login.pug. Right? So that should be in there. If I go into the templates, I forgot where that was. Views, they call it views. And there's the login.pug right there. That's what that looks like. See, there's the post, method post, action login. So that's those lines that generated that login form for us. Here's the username, input field, so on. And this is a message we can send. If we type in the wrong username or password, we'll send a message and send the user back to the form. You'll see the message there. All right, so, but now when this post method comes in, look, out of the request object, remember when the request handler runs, Node passes in a request object for us with all the information about the request. It'll have the username, the password, the date, you know, the browser that was used, all that stuff is in there. And we don't need all that stuff, but we do need the username and password. And so we get it out of this request object. So you see but actually our middleware, we set up the middleware so that the URL encoding, what was the thing called again? I'll show it to you. This, where is it? Here it is, this line right there. This is where we configured the middleware called URL encoded. This is part of Express. So if it finds form data being submitted using URL encoding, then it's going to automatically take the data out of the form, out of the HTTP message, and put it in the request object for us so that we can access it through a body field. So that code I just showed you, this library here, this middleware right there, by configuring that here, it creates that field body in the request object. Before, you know, if we didn't set that middleware, that body attribute wouldn't exist in the request object. It's a middleware that puts it there for us. And then that body object, and what does the word body refer to? The body of what? What body? Who knows? Body of the what? Of the HTTP message. Remember, the HTTP messages, they have a header and a body. And the header and the body are separated by a blank line. So we've got header lines, and each line is terminated by a character return line feed. And then we get a single line with just a character return line feed and no contents in it. That signals the end of the header section. And then the body section happens. That's where the form data is packed. It's packed in the body section. So the form data is taken out of the body of the HTTP message. That's why they use the field, the name body there. Okay. And then this is where it's been hard coded. See, we want to get it from the database. We're just saying, oh, is the password A? Oh, no, wait a minute. So now, when we get this user ID, we got to say, wait a minute. We got the password. This is the password that the user typed in. Let's get the password from the database and compare it. So we need the password for this particular user. So that's how that's going to look. Let's get that set up. So it'll look something like this. So this thing is going. So let's see how to do this. I think it's in routes and inside users. This is where we, no, not users, inside the index. So this is that's the home page. This is the login form. We don't need to mess with that. This is the post handler where we registered a post handler. We have to convert this from a stub to a fully functioning function. So we're going to have to get this password. We're going to check to see if the password is A, right? So really want to check to see if it's if this is if the supplied password, I'll say the submitted password, it goes like that. The submitted password is the submitted password equal to the stored password. If the submitted password is equal to the stored password, the password is good. We set in the session object, we set the user ID. And then we redirect the and the user is good. It provided a good password. We set the user ID in the session object. That'll be persistent. So next time a request comes in, we'll check the session object and say, oh, the user ID is in there. And so that means they're logged in. So we have to look for this in the session object to know that they're logged in. And then we redirect them to that users page. That's that private page. Only logged in users can see. If it's not a good password, we got a bad password or bad username. And then we send them back to the login screen. But we set a message. Remember that message? It's the MSG. See that? It matches with the MSG inside the poke file. So we need to get the submitted password comes from this body attribute, that body parser. That library I told you about, it uses another library called the body parser library. And anyway, that's that. And this is going to be the submitted password. And that's we take it out of there. And then we want to have the, the stored password. Look at this. I'm doing this pretty slowly, right? I'm going to keep it stubbed here. And that's how we're doing that. Stored password is A. So actually we want to get the stored password out of the database. So it's a database function. So we'll have a module called DB for database, our database. And in our module, let's have a function, get password. And we're going to pass in the user ID, and it returns the password to us. Okay. And if maybe I'll put a blank line in there. If the stored password that if the stored password is null, it means it didn't find it for that user ID. That's how we know. So this function, db.getPassword, this will return null if this user ID doesn't exist in the database. It's going to return a null. So we know the user doesn't exist. So if the user doesn't exist, we're going to do this. See, right there. We're going to send them to the login page. And we're going to say username or password incorrect. We're not going to tell them the username is incorrect, because that would just give a hacker more information. So we don't know. Is the hacker trying to get, if you say the username is incorrect, the hacker is going to go, oh, good, I can guess until I hit a valid username. So the hacker guesses until he gets a valid username. And then the message is going to be incorrect password. Oh, now when I get the username, I'm going to work on the password. So you don't want to give a hacker any information. So you want to keep that stuff quiet. So this is the stored password. Now, do you see the problem with the code I've written so far right here? This is, there's a few common errors when you're doing web development in particular. In development in general, the most common error is null pointer exception. That's the most common error. When you're doing web development, there's two very common errors. One common error is the browser cache is turned on and you don't realize it, and you're looking at stale web pages. You're not looking at freshly generated. So the code you just put in there and you think you're testing, you're not really testing, because you're looking at cache data. So you got to be very aware of that and turn your caching off. And that's why when I didn't do it this time, but normally I keep this window open. This is in Chrome now. And this thing keeps the, where is it? It's turns off caching when this window is open. And I don't remember how to find that setting, but it's in there. Maybe it's in here somewhere. Where is this? What's this? Settings? What's that? Is it in here anywhere? There it is. Disable cache while DevTools is open. It'd just be easier to find that thing. I don't know why they buried it way down in there. It's so important. It should be just a link up here where you turn it on and off. That's the way it used to be. So, but what is the other major error that's made over and over and over again? Okay, you will make this over and over again if you're a web developer, especially in the beginning. Like after we send this render here, that's the end. I mean, the message has gone out to the browser, right? The message has gone to the browser. This is a terminal activity when we're processing a request. Once it's call render, it's done. But look what happens. Control continues on, and then it's either going to issue a redirect or a render down there. I was like, well, wait a minute. You can't send out another, because see, it's HTTP protocols, request, response. I can only send one response. I sent my response here, and I come down here and send another response. It won't work. See, then you'll get an exception there. So this happens all the time. You got to remember to, once you've sent the response, you want to make sure you don't send anything else to the browser. So let's return there. All right. And that's all the code we need to add to this router module. Now we just, oh no, we need one more thing. We need to require this DB module. I have to give it a path name here. This is an absolute path name. I mean, it looks relative to the current directory, but it's fully specified. So here it knows it's a user supplied module. This here, it's, I'm not giving it a path name, right? I'm not doing something like that. So that's a built-in module. So you have to give the full path name for the user supplied modules. All right. That's the DB. So we're going to have that get password. Oh, no, wait a minute. The DB. Maybe I need to put it. Where do I put DB? I put it in. I'll do it right here. Well, we have roots here, public. I think it's all right to leave it. I'll leave it at the top level here. Okay, so at the end, what are we going to do? Let's see. What do the other modules look like? Let's take a look. The other modules. Oh, the roots are modules. So at the very end, we have a module.exports. So we're going to set this exports field. Module that's a pre-existing variable. So Node creates that variable for us when we're in a module, when we load a module and run it. So let's see here. This will be module.exports equals router. So what's this going to be? This is going to be get password. This is the module.exports equals, what the heck? So it's going to be something like, I'll just call it the module. I'll just call it M. Until I can think of a better name. And then, so this is, let's see, it will be let M equal, so this is our module. Maybe we could do it like this, let DB. It's easier to read. This is the database interface. And then let's define a function, which is get password. And that function takes a user ID, right? And so we can call this, but it's in this DB module. So let's do it like this. I think I can do that. Can I do that? Let's return null to let the system know that, hey, we couldn't find a user ID. We're stubbing a lot, right? So we stub continuously till we get to the very end, and then we take the last stub out, and then we're done. All right, so this is to get password. Now, the problem with this is hitting the database takes a lot of time. So we're going to need to do this in a callback function. So we're going to pass the callback function in here. And the callback function takes, let's see, the callback function will take, wait a minute. So we call to get user ID, and it's going to take get password. It's going to take a function called the callback function, and I'm a little confused for a second there. So in the callback function, I say we have to call a callback function. We're not going to return null here. This is artificial. I'm going to do it like this. I could just call the callback function, and there's no error, but it's a null, right? So it's a null. So there's no error, but we didn't find a password. So we're going to call the callback function like that. Now, pretend we hit the database and didn't find the user or the user ID. So if we didn't find a database, this is the error. This is the error, and this would be the value. Is the password itself. So let's see, when I go into routes and then index, and then so this is where we get the password. This is not going to work. So getting the password, we have to pass in the user ID, and then we pass in the callback function. And remember, the callback function takes an error, and then it takes the stored password. So, and we can't do this. This isn't going to work. Remember, it's asynchronous. So I coded it up like it was synchronous, but I have to make it asynchronous. It's hitting the database very slow, so we can't make asynchronous. We can't make the functions return and get the return value. We have to pass in callback functions. Wait for the database to give us what we need, and then we get the callback function to run. All right, so we call get password on the database module. We give this get password function to user ID, and then we give it a function that takes an error object and a stored password as a second argument. And if there's no error, then this will be set to null. And if there's an error, then this will be set to an error object. So so the first thing we do is we check for null. So if error is not null, then what are we going to do? Then there's some kind of an error there. Let's just bail and then deal with the error later. We'll deal with that later. Otherwise, we have we got the password. If error is not null, then we got to check to see if that stored password is null. So it means that we didn't find the user ID. And what are we doing here? This is login, right? Yeah. So if the stored password is null, we send them away. There we go. And we don't need a return here because when you throw, you're returning. So no return needed there. And then the rest of this needs to be tucked into the callback. Oops. And See how that works. And then this is going to be a call to that function. All right, this is the arguments to the function. This is the callback function main block. And then this is the else clause, the if. This is the other if. And that's this if up here has no brace. I'm just checking the braces. What about down here? Yeah, this makes sense too, right? That one is closed here, and then this one is closed up there. That looks good. This is a nice function of the editor, VI, but I'm sure you're using whatever, Sublime or Atom or whatever it is. They're going to show that too. So this is done, except it's not fully done because we want to handle this error maybe a little better. Maybe not. Maybe that's okay. Coming back to our module, I'm not sure about the syntax. This might not work. And so you see here, when we call get password, we're passing in the user ID and the callback function. And then we want to pretend we hit the database and didn't find user ID, so we just call the callback function. Now this is the cheap way to do the test. If you want to be really clean about it, you put this inside of a timeout. So you would like set a timer, set timeout. Is that where JavaScript is? Set timeout. Set timeout. Is that JavaScript? Yeah, that's it. And here, we say 10 milliseconds. I don't know. Maybe 4 milliseconds is enough. Maybe 0 is good. I don't know. Maybe 1. It's not going to wait 1 millisecond. There's some minimum. I think it could be 4 or something like that. And then we have the callback function, which just runs this, which we're just going to use to call the. See, this would be a more proper test. See that this is the thorough way to do it, because here the current thread has not. We haven't released the current thread, so we call get password, and then we call the callback function. There's been no break. See, we went directly to, so it may cover up some subtle error, and that we might not catch because of threading issues. So what we could do is let the thread come to an end, and then schedule this task here to schedule the call of the callback function. Schedule it so that a millisecond later, call the callback. So finish processing everything, get into that waiting queue, and then come off the waiting queue. So it'll better simulate the hitting the database. I got to tell you, I never bothered to do that, when I did development, and I never found it to be the source of any subtle errors for me. But it's just something I've always thought about, and I haven't been able to think of a situation where that would get into trouble. So I think you can safely leave that out, and I'll take that off. All right, just to let you know about that. This is the simple way to do it. Now, this should run, right? We got everything. It's going to say, username or password is unknown, because we're always returning null, right? Well, let's see if this actually runs. Cannot find module.db. Now, the problem with that is that under roots is the index.js. That's where we're trying to require .db, but I put db at a higher level with the app.js. So that means I got to go in, I got to change that path. Oops. This should be up a level. Dot DB, that'll do it. Oh, I didn't do it. Unexpected token. See, I can't see it there, right? It's too small. So I'm gonna dump that. I'm gonna do 2 arrow. I'm gonna take the standard error stream, direct it to a file named T for temporary. And then I'm going to look in T because I can't read it. There's the error. db.getPath. So it doesn't like that. Remember I said I wasn't sure about that syntax there? So it didn't like that one. Let's fix that. So it's function db.getPassword. I'll just do it like this. db.getPassword. I know there's a fancy way to do this that I'm not doing. It equals this function here. We can do it like that. Usually put a semicolon there. It's a statement that it's just a statement. I'm going to remove that temporary file, and then I'm going to try running that app again to see if it goes. It's still no good. Express.router is not a function. What the heck? Express.router is not a function. If I have to run it like this. It's in index.js express.router. Express.router is not a function. So how come this was just running a moment ago? So that's interesting. Express.router. Oh, it's interacting with this somehow, right? Express.router. Do you see the problem? Express. I copied the line. This should be DB. See that? How to do that debugging. Okay. That's the easiest thing to do is debugging. You know, figuring out what to write, that's the hard part. That's debugging is just taking it easy. All right, so, no error. It's looking good. Let's go to, now what is it we're supposed to do? So suppose that we should not be able to log in. I'm going to reset things. We should not be able to log in because it always, the function getPassword always returns null. So I want to type in a valid password, or what used to be valid, and there it says it's not correct. Doesn't matter what it's going to do. So we got our stub code working, and now we got to get this. We got to figure out how to get the password. All right. So there's a, let's see if I get some notes on this. All right, so we're going to have this Postgres. I already downloaded it and installed it, and on the Mac, it gives me a little icon up there, and I see it's already running. It runs automatically. I could turn that off because I really don't need that actually. Probably I should turn that off. Automatically start Postgres on login. No, because most of the time I'm not running Postgres. I'm just going to set that. And there we go. It's still running, see? It's still running. That's what I want it to run, but I don't want it to run automatically when I log in. Okay. So on a Postgres, you know, like it's got a PG. Once you install it, you know, PG runs the oh, I thought that was it, Postgres. Is it Postgres? Wait a minute. What is it again? Postgres client? I can't remember. How do you start it? how do you get the command line? Does anyone know the, oh, PSQL, sorry. PSQL, Postgres. There we go. And then to get out, it's, I'm going to try this. \Q. Does that get me out? It does. PSQL gets me in, \Q gets me out. Now I can go in and what I want to do, let's see. You know, you're going to need to read up on this stuff. Well, I have a YouTube video on the topic if you want to look at that, an older one now. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at this. If you haven't had a database class yet or worked with databases, that's something you need to learn. I mean, everybody has to know. I mean, everybody in this business needs to know SQL in particular. You should know SQL. And I mean standard query language. I don't mean SQL Server by Microsoft. I mean standard query languages. Relational databases implement this thing called SQL. Non-relational databases like MongoDB and others, they do not use SQL. They use something similar to SQL, but they don't use SQL. SQL is a kind of a generic database language for hitting relational databases. So it's supported by Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, I mean, you name it, just a long list. IBM, WebSphere, I forget what the database is called. And then, anyway, this is the, what do we got here? New Postgres, developer documentation I got here. Get the manuals. And so this is good. Online manuals, these are the versions here. What version? Version 11, so there we go. This version here. Version 11. So it's been around a long time. It's a very widely respected open source project. And so anyway, let's you'll have to become familiar with that. There's a command, create DB, and I'm going to call the database MAP. That's the name of our application. Use that create DB. I think I have it in these notes here. See that? This has to do with in the lab. If you're in the lab, you got to configure like this. If you're on your local machine, you got to figure out how to configure it. It's easier than the lab. The lab machine is the most complicated. And you have to, learn how to create a table, delete a table, all this stuff, right? Oh, and here's the create database, create DB SAM. We're going to call ours MAB. And then, and here's some examples. So we've got this create table. I'm going to look at this. Let's see. So I'm going to have what we're going to do is this create db.sh. I'm going to create a shell script that, well, not that sh.sql. And SQL, I'm going to put my SQL commands in a script because I want to rerun it all the time. I don't want to have to type it in every time. I want to run these commands. So I'm putting them into a script. And it'll be create table, create table users. And then, it looks something like that. I better make sure I don't do this a lot. So there we go. And then need to have an ID field. First is the name of the field. So you're creating a table. Databases. A database is a collection of tables, well, and indices, and maybe something else, more general than that. Something like a, what do they call it? I forget the term. So anyway, it's mostly about tables. So you've got, it's like a spreadsheet. You've got columns and rows. That's how you store the data. And you've got multiple tables. And some of the tables are kind of related to each other sometimes, right? So we'll look at that. I'm not sure we're going to get to that, but I'm just going to give you the very simple introduction to databases, just to get them, just so you can use them. Really, the database class that you could take here, that would be very useful. It's very practical, the database class is very practical. But you don't have to take the class, you study it on your own. You should get good at using databases, no matter what area you're focusing in. It's just something that's just pretty commonly used in the industry. So the ID, now then you got to give the data type. And the data type is going to be varchar. It's a variable number of characters up to a maximum of 255. You can't go any higher than 255. That's the max. So, and this will be a primary key. So the table. So when we remember, a database table is like a spreadsheet. It's got rows and columns, but you could have a million rows. So you got to find. You have to have some way of finding the row that you want. So there has to be a key field, at least one in there, that you use to locate the rows. You know, it's like the rows have labels, like a telephone book. You know, you look up by the name. That's the label, and then all the other information is given there. So here we look up the row in a table, the user's table. We look up that row, we find it by the user ID. That'll be this. And actually, we could just do it like that, user ID. And so we tell it that's what we're going to use it for. So it's a primary key. You'll need to read about that. And then we have a password. This is the password field, and that's also a varchar. We'll make it a varchar 235. And this will be, and we can add a restriction. We say it's not null. You can't have a null password. And that's it. That's all we're going to have for now. It's just user ID and password. We won't have anything else. Add the data later. And let's see if the syntax is correct. So I do, and this, you got it. This will take a little while to figure out. PSQL, and then the database is called map. And no, I can't remember how to do this study. Oh, here it is. Do it like this. This is the example. You do PSQL, and this is the host. In some system like Windows, you have to do this, or Mac, you have to do it. Remember, but just to play it safe, I'm going to specify that the database is running on the local host. The name of the database is map, and I don't want to start the command line interface. I want to use this client program to get its commands from a file that I supplied. I called create db.sql. Look at that. It bounced back. It showed me that create a table. See. So if I go into the database, I'm in, and then I'm going to go. If I do \DT, that lists the tables. I just remembered that. There's a lot of these commands. I mean, if I type help, for instance, \H, those are the SQL commands. But help by itself gives us these slash commands. /H, that's help with SQL commands. /? is help with PSQL commands. So these things that start with this \, that's not standard SQL. It's particular to Postgres. But these are standard SQL commands. They work in all of the most of these will work in all of the relational databases. So if I did question mark, it shows me all of this stuff. And informational, you know, this should be list tables right there, views and sequences. So it's I don't know what that S shows, system objects plus additional detail. Anyway, I know that it's /DT, and it shows me, this is the list of relations, and which is a database table, I guess. I don't know why they call it a relation. It's a database theory. Why do they use the word relation there? And I'm not ready to comment on that. And this is a schema. I'm going to omit that. And then the name of the table is users. Well, I see there's other kinds of relations, right? So maybe there's, I think, indices. I certainly got to have the indices in there. And there's an owner too. That's the user. Got the name because we created the table. I created the database from the command line as a logged in user. So anyway, the table is there. So I can do what is the select star from users. So I want to select all fields from users, 0 rows. There's no users in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some users. So after we create the table, let's try recreate. Before we do that, let's recreate the table. Watch, if I run this again, I want to recreate the table. But it fails. It says users already exist. So what I want to do is drop table users. I want to drop it first. You can't do this the first time. If the table doesn't exist, then you can't drop it. So I had to wait to create it once before I could put that line in there. And now, if I run this, it drops the table and creates a table again. All right, so that's how I'm going to be able to rerun the script. You can wipe the table out, create the table fresh again. So as we do the development and add data, add columns, then we just have to run the script again. All right, so let's use the insert command. So we want to insert a row into the table, into the users table. So insert, all right, I could guess it, but I might as well look at it. It looks like this. Insert into users. And I'll show you the full formal way to do it. Insert into users. There's a user ID and password and values. The user ID is going to be A, and I'll make the password A, right? So we're going to recreate it. That's it. And let's create 2 users. And the other one will be B. At that, so creating 2 users. Let's run that thing. Look at that, see? Drop, create, insert, insert. Then if we go into the database to take a look, so we just run this thing again, but we just get off the -F because we don't want the commands to come from a file. We want the commands to come from the command line. So I'll just go like that. So I'm going to use the select command. This is a SQL command, select. So you're selecting columns in a table, and you want to look at the values in those columns for the rows in the table. So, but we can get all columns. We can do select start means select all columns. Well, if we want to specify, we're going to say select user ID, comma, password. This is the formal way to do it. Instead of using star, we can select user ID password from users. See? And that's it. If I do star, it gives me a different output, I think. So it shows me A and B here. This is good. It shows me the columns. So now, what we got to do is we got to hit the database. Oops. So we need to, we have to Postgres, DB, what's it, DB. So select, how did I do that? Let's require, was it PSQL? Postgres. Running out of time. What is it? 5:13. Probably don't have time to get it done. You want to bang it out super quick? 5 minutes? Okay. Well, in order to bang it out super quick, I'm going to need a little help. So I'm going to go up to a little sample program. Let's see, what did I do it? Oh, I did it like this. Okay. Oh, there's a lot to put in there. I'm just going to grab it for you and show it to you. We'll talk more about it later, maybe. All right, so there's a module called PG. And we're going to see this line right here. I'm going to do it super quick. I want to skip some little details. So we're getting the pool object and a client object, but really we only need the pool object. I don't think we're using the client anywhere. And so I'm just going to comment that out. So I don't think we need that. So a database connection pool. You know, you've got a lot of users hitting the database simultaneously. So you've got to make a lot of separate connections to the database. So you're going to use a pool. So we have a pool of connections. So we don't have to recreate open and closed connections. We just want a bunch of open connections that we can use on the fly as needed. So we have to configure that. So we're going to create, this is a constructor. We get the pool constructor. So we're going to use the new operator on that constructor to create a pool object. And we have to give it, this is the database username. This is the host name the database is running on. The name of the database, which is map. Password, which there's no pass, we didn't set a password. This is the port number 5432, that's the default port number for Postgres. And so once we got that, let's see, I'll have to do this fast. Then we got to call a init here. I don't think this init, this just tests to see if we can hit the database. Let me do that one later. This is the get, oh look, the get password function right there. Look at this. I'm just gonna put it in there. How's that? Let's just put it in there and I'll explain it to you. Exports.update data. I see, that's how we do that. exports.getPassword. Yeah, let's do it like that. Let's do it like that. So we don't need this DB business. We don't need this. Oh, we have an init function there already, but let me take it out. We'll put that init function in later. So the getPassword function, it takes this user ID and a callback function. So we do, when we want to get the password out of the database, we have to make a connection. So we ask the pool to give us a connection. So we don't want the pool to, we don't want the system to spend time making a connection. It's very expensive to make an initial connection to the database. We just want to make the connection and hold on to it and just reuse it over time. So we put these open connections in a pool. We're saying, pool, give us a connection. And then and when that's ready, you can give the connection to us by calling our callback function. And the callback function takes an error argument. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And then there's a client. This is the object that lets you, it gives you access to the database. It's where that object lets us send in SQL commands to the database. And this function, it gives us the driver, the database driver gives us this done function. That's another. This is a function, a done function. We're responsible to call done when we're finished with the connection. What happens when we finish the connection? We call done, and it goes back into the pool as an available connection. If we never call done, we've got a situation of what's it called? Like a leak, a memory leak, or specifically a database connection leak. And so we'll eventually run out of connections. We don't call it done. So here we're going to check for errors, and this is where we send in the query. Remember that select? So we want to select the password from users where the user ID equals, and here we're put it in like this, so where the user ID equals, and then the value of user ID, that's being passed in to the function right there. So this is the select command, and when the select command completes to call this callback function, it's an error, in case it was an error, that's the first argument, and then there's the result. And that's called a result set, by the way. And then look, we're done with the connection, so let's, without waiting around, let's just call done right there and say, we're done with the connection, thank you. And then we check to see if there's an error. If there is, then we call the callback function with the error. And this return, you know, we could put it after the callback. We didn't, that's a fancy way to do it, you know. I mean, this is essentially what that looks like. I just try to take out that fanciness for you there. This is the same thing. That's the same idea. So call the callback function and then return. Get that right. All right. I could just return CB error. It'll do the same thing. This callback function doesn't return anything, so it returns a void. So if there's no error, then we don't hit this code. And then we check the result set. And this result object has a field called rows. How many rows do we get? Well, that's the length. That gives us how many rows we got from this query. Select password from users where the user ID equals A. So the user ID is a primary key. It's unique. You cannot insert two different rows with user ID equaling A. The database will reject it. So we know that the user ID is unique. So the number of rows that should be returned should be exactly 1. But if we get a 0, that means the user ID is not in there. And so if the length comes back 0, it means we didn't find the user ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in null here. See this null here. This is callback function that got passed into us from the calling code. So this null means we didn't have an error. There's no error. It's okay not to find any records. That's not an error. So, but we're going to tell it that there's no password because we didn't find the record. So we pass null in for the second argument. That's the normal convention. The normal convention in Node is to send the error object in these callback functions. If there's an error object, send it in first. And so you check that first. And then if there's an error, then you take care of it. All right. So, return there. Like, see how fancy that is? That's one fancy code there. So just to take out the fanciness, we're just going to return after calling the callback function. And let's suppose that the length is not 0, then the length must be 1. And we could have an assertion for that, but I'm going to leave that out. And then, so we call the callback function with the password. And this is how we get it. You know, it's the row 0, because there's only one row 0, as a password field, because we're only selecting on the password field. So that should kind of do it. And this is our get password function, remember, see? This is the case where simulating we didn't find it. Remember, so when the length of the result set is 0, we're going to pass in null here. So that's what we were doing. Take this out. And let's do it. DB is not defined. Oh, I took that DB out, didn't I? I said exports.getPassword. I don't need this. I'm putting that. See, Node. See, actually, what happens here is that exports object is created for us already, and it's going to be returned. When we do require, it's going to return that exports object from require. So we just want to add on a get password function to it. So that's why we tacked it on. Let's, okay, we're almost there. Watch this. Go to login. Remember, this didn't work before. It works. Get out of the database. I can't believe how easy that was. 524. We went over a little bit. I'll get into more details next week, okay? Is there any questions before I shut down? This all, I recorded this, so I'll upload it on YouTube. You guys can check it out if you want. And we'll get into more refinements on this. Okay, that's it.